We're just missing George. Okay. One wearing a Pipe Dream shirt. All right. Okay. Maybe we'll. Is this on? I think it is. So we're going to begin, and we may be joined by George Routhier from Pipe Dreams. But I'm just going to start with at the far end and have our panelists introduce themselves, and then we're going to just jump right in and start talking a little bit about the global scene. So, Frenchy?
So, my name is Frenchy. I'm a hashishin. I make traditional hashish, and some of my teachers were Afghan, and in Afghanistan, a master hashmaker is a hashishin. I consider it a craft. I have dedicated my life to it, and through 40 years of relation with that plant, spending 20 years in producing country, it went from a love relation as a youngster that was seen as the most devilish thing that you could do. Then I traveled in producing country, in hashish producing country, where it's part of the culture, but it's not really totally accepted. Then I went to India, and the plant is dedicated to a god every time you smoke. And then finally I came to California, and I realized that the plant is also a medicine. So it has been a long-term relation, and through that relation I've learned a lot, and I'm trying to share it.
Thank you.
Jeanette VanderMarel. I was up here before, so I've been in the space a while. Back in 2011 I founded the Green Organic Dutchman, along with my husband. Actually made Arjan back then. And then sold that in 2017. Started Good and Green, another licensed producer, and then merged that with 48 North Cannabis. So currently at 48 North have one of the very large outdoor cannabis farms, 77.5 acres of outdoor cannabis right now. But I'm really excited about the international opportunities for cannabis going around the world. And Frenchy and everyone here has got some great input on that as well.
Thank you. Kev?
Hi, I'm Kevin Jodrey. I spoke earlier today, so I'll be brief. I'm a career cultivator, known primarily for moving genetics into the industry. I own a series of businesses in cannabis, and I do international consulting also.
Great. And for those who weren't in the previous session, Arjan?
My name is Arjan Roskam, and I'm the founder of Greenhouse Seeds and Strain Hunters.
Super. So, Jeanette, you talked about jumping into this international world. Do you want to share some of your initial thoughts about where Canada is going to fit into the international play?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, as Canada being the first G7 nation or G20 nation to legalize cannabis, I think we're really setting that milestone for other countries around the world, showing that the world hasn't fallen. The sky has not fallen. We haven't had mass chaos because we legalized cannabis. I've been spending a fair bit of time in Europe recently, in the UK, and going to Spain and Portugal and Malta, and those countries as well, where they're really starting to adopt cannabis cultivation really quickly. There's a lot of opportunities in those countries, but also because the CBD market is much more readily available to consumers than it is here in Canada, I think there's a lot of opportunities for international expansion and lower cost production, and ecologically friendly as well.
I wanted to jump to Kev there. I know that we both do some work in Colombia. Do you want to share a little bit what's going on in Colombia?
Yeah, Colombia's pretty fascinating because, you know, Colombia was a historic cannabis producer, and through the drug wars it really got beat up. But you're seeing this resurrection of an industry there, and due to the climate being hospitable to certain varietals, and the light cycle being pretty hospitable to getting flower cycles. And you have a people, and I would say similar to the Mexicans, where you have an agricultural people that have been doing ag for years. And I think inherently they have a different type of relationship with plants, and so there's a different feel. So it's fascinating because you see the ability for these countries to start to get a commoditized product that's beneficial, that doesn't have a lot of the issues that some of the products they created in prior did. And so I see it as a really positive benefit for those countries, and I think they're going to be pretty frightening to have to contend with down the road, because in other products that they produce, they're pretty frightening.
Do you want to speak a little bit about GMP and some of the issues around that in Colombia?
I think some of the issues with moving on, see, you know, like Canadians, United States, Europeans, more of highly regulated markets for time. I think that with some of these other nations, they're going to have to go through, and you're going to have to really find out, can you actually cultivate in some of the regions? A lot of the materials used in ag in some of these places left residual toxins. And so because cannabis is an accumulator, it's pulling it up out of the ground. So I see the development of, you know, that's a lot of stuff that I do, is we go there and we start to scout properties, we scout areas that they want to work with, and then we figure out, can we actually cultivate there and get a standardized product that doesn't require expensive mediation. If we have to remediate it, the cost offsets the profitability of being in those locations. Mm-hmm. So I think that it's just that it's an evolution. It's the beginning of it, but it's a process of how do we take these places and then have them produce what they're supposed to produce, so that all the region, and to me, agriculture should be done locally, and in a sense where you grow what grows best in the area that you're working with. That way you're not having to fight it, and then you use export-import to move the product. But with some of these places, because cannabis is so highly regulated, unusually regulated, the most regulated of any agricultural product, it creates a different level of standard of quality for that. And I think that some of these good manufacturing practices will start to standardize it so that people have a surety of the product quality when it goes to any other market.
Great. Arjan, you know, Congo's been always interesting. There's been a lot of talk about Congo entering into the cannabis market. Do you want to share a little bit of your experience?
Yeah, I think, as my colleague next to me was explaining, these countries have much more potential than countries like Canada, where we have a different climate and much more regulations and much more overhead, which not always doesn't make sense. I think Congo, and if we look at the soil, which is one of the most important things, and climate, one of the last parts in the world that has not been polluted is Central Africa. So we are in a completely clean environment, and we are also exactly on 12-12, so we don't even need light depth, and our temperature is always between 18 and 35. And yeah, so for me, it was very logical to work in Congo, because for me that's the best place in the world to grow genetics. It surprised me that until now, some big LPs and some big corporate companies came to us, talked a little bit, but then they were all a little bit scared of the political situation in Africa, and they're like, we don't go there. Might as well then go to another country, put $100 million in, which doesn't make any sense at all, instead of going to a country where it makes sense. So there's a lot to learn for the corporate companies, also in Canada and America, that I think are operating in some wrong countries. And I think the potential of Africa in the future, where we are producing for $25 a kilo instead of whatever, $200 a kilo, is highly. And at the same time, you know, we employ more than 250 people. So it's really nice. We have clean water, we have free land, we have free air, and yeah, it's just a big benefit to the product. And yeah, it's around the equator where you can grow great. It's even a much better country than Colombia, where there's much more humidity. Where also Colombia, you can do great things, but if you really look at the core of the core, and don't forget Congo. If you look at science, and let's look pure at science and proof, is the country in the world with the biggest diversion on plants and fruits. So that says enough, no? Naturally occurred in that country.
I'll get Frenchy to comment on the equator 12 and 12 and how that plays into some resin. But more importantly, we're entering into an edibles market. You know, hopefully in October. Can you comment about other countries and where we might be fitting into producing some hash here in Canada? So, do we have? Is there a potential hash market here in Canada, or is that going to be a challenge relative to your global experience?
No, I mean, for me, I'm dedicated to quality. All my life, I've been dedicated to quality. If I spend months in caves or living with a local to make my own ash to smoke for the year, it's been a life passion. Now I can create my stash and share it with the public. It's pretty huge, and I could become literally global, staying in the Emerald Triangle, which is beyond the dream. So but at the same time, everything I am, it's because of the farmer and the genetic I work with. When I travel in India, when I went to Pakistan, to Nepal, to Morocco, it's never been me making the ash. It's where did I go to make the ash. And when you go in India, it's very precise valley. It's hamlet in precise valley that gives the value to the resin. So everything you see on IG, everything I am, I owe it to my farmer. And to be able to create a global market, I need the support of the resale of everything that is not actually making something concrete. I need those people who want the product to support my farmer, because without them, I have nothing to show. And it's that balance where in America there is no relation with farming. You don't have thousands of years of evolution. You were not fit last World War. The farmer not only grow the food, but they were risking their life to bring the food in the city. That relation we have and the respect we have for the farmer is huge. And beyond that, there is the recognition, the quality, it's because of the place of origin. It's because of the land, the climate, the cultivar, and beyond the farmer, the communities that support that farmer. This creates quality. This is something like Bordeaux, like Roquefort. There is people in Provence. There is one farm that produces a lavender that is unique on the planet, because that person has such a relation with the ecosystem he's part of, it can create uniqueness. This is the ultimate value for the product we will create. I want to wow you. If I wow you, you will always remember what I gave you. This is a product that you degust. It's not something just to get high or to cure yourself. It's something that is all a question of palate. If I can touch you at that level, that the strongest memory you have, you will always remember what I gave you to taste.
You'll catch more of that passion. Frenchy's going to be giving the talk right after this. Yes. Jeanette?
Yeah, just to say, so I've had the fortune of growing up as a farmer here in Canada, growing apple farm. I also had a lavender farm here in Canada, and obviously cannabis farm as well. There is a lot of value in growing cannabis here, whether it be for the value-added next-gen products, and the fact that we can get GMP or EU GMP certification here really helps us to distribute it both domestically in Canada, potentially in the United States, or collaborate with US companies when that's allowed, but also for European exports, which is really a niche that we have here in Canada right now that I really think we need to capitalize on. We have that ability right now, and I think creating great products here in Canada. And yes, we don't have ideal climate. We have a lot of great agriculture and farming, and I'm a proud Ontario farmer. We do grow a lot of good products here. We can grow really good outdoor cannabis. And I think anyone who lives around here has found some really good outdoor cannabis around. So it does grow well here. But our strength is our ability with our legalization and our structure and our regulation to take that IP and move that to other countries to help them create their systems. And they may be able to grow at a much lower cost. But I think that worldwide we do need some standards around cannabis quality and compliance and purity, so that we don't have this unlevel playing field as we currently do with the gray black market and the legal industry.
Thanks. Kevin, did you want to comment on?
Yeah, I agree with you so much on the certifications for surety. In California, you're having a terrible problem with some black market cards. So that's funny, I'm from the black market, my whole career was prior to that. But people use those words so, yes, with the free market. But we call it the prior market. But in that market, they're having this incredible issue where for the first time, you're having debts due to issues with the cartridges. And so I think we have maybe 11 dead, 400 some odd injured from it. It's stuff like that starts to drive the awareness, and that's where I believe that what you're doing in Canada, it has the ability to start to begin a normalization because it's accepted on a nationwide level. The US is still incremental, so California is like its own world because we're so financially powerful. But it's not the world, and it's definitely not the United States. Whereas for you as a nation, you're operating at a much higher level in terms of acceptance. And that begins the ability for other nations to see it and then say, hey, how do we standardize and how do we have a quality standard that fits within all nations?
I just want to welcome George Routhier from Pipe Dreams. George, do you want to make some comments around the global cannabis market?
Hello everyone, sorry for being late, they wouldn't let me in. Apparently I have too much THC in my body. So international markets, we get involved with a lot of governments and they're all looking for a lot of advice. They look to Canada as a leader in the industry. We have the strongest regulations, we're going to have even more stronger regulations. I personally think it's putting far too much burden on people that are trying to bring this business to life. That's another story. So internationally, one of the things that I see is kind of a crisis that we have, and maybe it started here because we were the first ones in, but the crisis I see is in the quality of the product. You know, it brings me to growers. I've been growing cannabis for 51 years, and I probably have one of the largest private collections of cultivars in the world, almost 800, and they're not all these feminized things that are out there anymore, the Frankenstein seeds. So I think a lot of it comes down to our growers and the reluctance to embrace the people that have been doing this a long time. I go in and I see a lot of facilities and what they're growing, and unfortunately, I'm not always there for growing problems, but I'll tell you something. We need more focus on growers and improving growers. Everyone's a master grower. Anyone here grow? Okay. I'll ask you a question. Do you grow good weed? Pardon me, cannabis. That's the gentrification. What are you going to say? Of course you do. Everyone grows the best stuff, right? Well, sorry you don't. It's really hard to grow very good weed consistently, high yield, and we've got lots of examples on our marketplace. Don't get me wrong, it's everywhere. We need more focus on the growers. To do that, we need more focus at the top. There seems to be a big disconnect. The stovepipes we created between the different fractions within the facilities, that if they focused on growing, do you realize how much profitability you're leaving on the table? It's spectacular. You can increase profitability. Rush to the bottom line. Who wants your 50 cent a gram stuff that you're producing? It's not quality, and without quality you have nothing. Quality never goes out of style. So we really need to up our game because the international world looks to us. We've got great growers. Let's focus on them and take advantage of the marketplace.
Thanks, George.
Get started on GMP and EU GMP.
Well, I think that's a good start. I think we can get some good comments on some of what George has just said.
I'll make a brief comment. One of our challenges here in Canada, of course, for cultivation was we were very limited in our access to genetics. Health Canada didn't limit us for a number of years. It's just since the new Cannabis Act of last year that we're allowed to bring in new cultivars and expand our genetic libraries within the industry. We were pretty hamstrung, and there was really 30 or 40 strains that we traded on doing all the LPs. So now with the new licenses and the Cannabis Act, there's a lot new, better genetics coming in.
What do you call better genetic?
Well, anything that wasn't the 30 strains we were stuck with before.
Yeah, but I mean, if you bring wedding cake and everything that is grown in California, it's not going to differentiate you. You need to be able to actually go to landrace and create lines that become heirloom here in Canada. If you really want to stand on the market, you will never be able to produce like in Morocco, in South Africa, in Lebanon, in India, in Pakistan. Those people have been producing quantity for millennium. You cannot compete against those people. But we have the science, we have the knowledge, and the plant can adapt from South Africa to Alaska. And so you need to create your own pool of genetic and be unique in a world market. That's the only chance we have. It's to bring something that was the people, that is unique, and that is grown with love and care. Without that dedication, you would just have common weed chip. That's everybody's gonna have it. So the only chance to really be someone in a market with the respect that you should receive, it's by bringing the quality. That's the only thing that really talks at the end of the day.
Genetics is power. Genetics is the future in this business. He's absolutely right.
But it's not done. It's not done by each individual, though. The problem is that you're a licensed. And I'm someone who's been in this my whole life as a producer and genetic hunter too. So the genetics are what drives me always. But what it requires producers to produce and then research facilities to do the breeding and the development, because it's not so simple. So in order to differentiate, it takes time to differentiate, and as a licensed producer, as a farmer, I can't do that. I have to make financial decisions to keep the company moving forward, and as we stay alive, we can then start to differentiate. But to differentiate and then fail doesn't work. And so I think that the issue is first to get some kind of stability within your production methodologies. And I think a lot of it is to get the people that are doing the commercial cultivation to have someone who is cannabis knowledgeable present, so they can say, no, this stuff is garbage, I wouldn't buy it. Because it doesn't have to be the upper level. If I need a watch, I can still use a Timex. It gives me better time than a Rolex I'm wearing. It's just the Rolex is fun to touch because it doesn't make any sound when you listen to it. But the Timex still is a watch. So we start off with a watch, and then we refine the process. And I think that's what Canada has to work with, is that the fact that you have this incredible head start on the rest of these nations, because you have such an accepted legality, and then you allow it to develop. And as you go forward, I think the failures that you've experienced through product quality, in that you were limited on what you could use, it brought awareness that that's not the right route. But the industry, as it develops, you're going to have to develop, just like Arjan with greenhouse seeds. His function is in seed production and creating material that others use for production. It's impossible for each LP to have their own development section until they're fully funded, or you're just burning up investment money, and at some point, the investors want to get paid.
That's the major problem. And that's not only that's basically for the whole world. That's for whole America and for whole Canada. And coming back on Congo again, I don't have an investor. I'm on my own with my company. So, and if you do genetics and you make your lines, you need to put out every time a few thousand plants. In normal agriculture purposes, you put 10 to 100,000 plants out to find the perfect pheno to go on to F2 or F3, F4, or whatever you're doing. You can imagine if you have a very expensive LP, where your cost price is already $2 or $3 or whatever, yeah, there is no way you can do any genetic breeding in Canada, because it's just unpayable. And the same for America. People think they're breeding, and they do 20 plants in the corner, and they come up with this and they come up with that. But if you go back in the threads of the genetics in America, you can all relate it to 4 varieties. So if you really want to do big-time genetics, you need a lot of space. And you don't have an investor in the back of you pushing you very hard for so many kilos, because that's not going to happen when you do genetics. So that's the downside part of getting great genetics into the system. It takes a very, very long time to organize that, and you need a lot of space, and you need people around you that are committed to do it.
Some of the greatest strains that we have came from basement breeders.
But that's as a cultivar, not as a reproducible line. And
so
so
what we have came from that.
But
I'm not saying that I don't agree with what he's saying, but I don't want people to be disillusioned about breeding. I breed all the time. My wife's far better off now than she was 20 years ago because of my breeding efforts. So yes, we need to have concerted breeding programs, but everybody out there that's making their own chemistry in the basement, keep doing it, man, because you might just have what we need.
And I agree that you have to develop it from the bottom. So like art always comes from odd places. I think that's why they break art out of the school systems, because it allows people to break free from a standardized system, because it's creativity. It's just that when we're talking about breeding, that's not really you're breeding to hunt a cultivar. Breeding is for reproducibility and seed form line, otherwise we're having to run nurseries, and that increases the quality or the cost. What I'd love to see happen is true breeding lines that have some level of consistency so that you can run from seed and have a level of standardization that gives you a good range. When they do the testing for us, it's in 50-pound batches. They pull 7 samples out. If it's from 7 different varietals and it brings my numerics down by 11%, 12%, 20%, that's a change in the value of it. And that's what we don't have, is stabilized, standardized lines that actually breed true. That's what I mean by breeding. So I'm somebody who hunts the odd free cultivars, and I look for people that pull these one-off out of nowhere. But the fact is that that's just a cultivar. It's not a breeding line. And so technically you're reproducing seed, but you're not breeding. Breeding would be you're creating something that reproduces itself consistently over time to a degree of standardization that gives you consistency. And that's what we don't have, is we don't have the consistent seed lines. That's the issue, you know?
Like you breed dog and horses, like real breeding, not just F1.
No, or corn or any other thing. And you know, nobody wants to see cannabis totally commoditized, which will happen. We all know that's going to happen inevitably. But we do need stable genetics that we can work from. And also, then work with some crossbreeding and some phenotyping and do some research on really expressing some of the minor cannabinoids, because some of them are showing some really great therapeutic properties as well. TCD is an example. So to breed strains that express more of those minor cannabinoids is things we need to work on as well in the future.
I may have I've lost control over the topic, but I've handed the mic out to James Welburn. If anyone has a question in the audience, just raise your hand and he can run up the mic to you. But maybe I will try to get back a little on topic here and just ask to see if what people are thinking about other countries who are now exporting into countries where Canada was exporting, and what impact that might have on Canada.
Yeah, so currently, as far as I know, that Australia is now exporting to Germany, and Canada really did have a solid footprint in the German cannabis trade at one point. There's very little, if any, domestic production in Germany right now. Australia, though, has a very similar economy to us and similar educational status. Obviously, for Canada to be a leader, it will be challenging if countries like Colombia, things like that, start exporting to EU GMP markets. It will certainly lessen our ability, because obviously we can't be competitive with their labor costs and our regulatory compliance we're held to here.
And I think that, you know, you look at countries like Israel, where they're going to export product, but really they're going to export IP, because they've been most definitely doing research work to a level no one else has for the last 20 years. And it's stuff like that that's fascinating, because it's to take that knowledge base and then move it into operations, so that you have Israeli companies bringing information, technology, genetics into Canada, to let Canadian companies do the production of it, and then you'd have that union. You'd be able to utilize the tools here, the capacity, because Israel's small, and it's really not optimal for production, but it's incredible for research and development and understanding. And so I think that some of the countries won't compete with you in terms of product, but they're going to compete with you in terms of who actually controls the technology on the production of the product.
So, Kev, do you want to just follow up? Oregon is now exporting, or potentially exporting? What's going to happen when the U.S. starts?
The U.S. is scary, because the U.S. is scary in the sense that when John Deere and International Harvester come to town, you're looking at a radically different type of product. And I think that with Oregon, they had a surplus of production because of the way they had the standards of what was allowed. So everyone was allowed to produce at a level that just filled the system. And so the governor said, hey, maybe if we created an export model, we could do this. But we don't have that treaty in the U.S. that lets us export state to state, and they're discussing it so that states that allow export could export to each other, and then eventually when the U.S. is not so regulated on their federal level, we export to other countries. But that's not what I would worry about in terms of like the U.S. It's the Midwest. It's when you start to exchange wheat and corn, which are commodity crops, and you exchange them for cannabis in terms of biofuel, for omega derivatives, for fiber derivatives. If you take the hemp crop itself and you pelletize the stalk, it burns hotter than Madrone, which in the U.S. is probably the highest BTU output on fire. And so you end up having this incredible value where you can take the product that you're using as waste and you can use it to run cogeneration plants to power the facilities. So when you're talking, 100,000 acres like you would in Nebraska, that's when the U.S. really becomes a dominant player. The U.S. only seems to do a few things, and beat people up is one of them, and sell products on a massive level is another. And I think that that's the scary part, is that when the U.S. fully engages and they switch their commoditized corn and wheat, which they embrace globally, which we're seeing issues now with the trade war in China. So it's bringing this awareness that we're kind of dependent on certain countries for certain products. We would diversify what we produce. When that happens, that's going to be frightening, because they'll turn that into an industrial monster that until you see Nebraska and you see combines and plowing, you just can't believe what you see.
Frenchy?
Yeah, but at the same time, the plant, like we're all blocked down on the medicinal aspect of the plant and the psychoactive aspect of the plant. That plant is the only renewable resource on the planet that can actually change the way we're going. That means, and we're going to extinction, and we have like 12, 15 years. That means that it's nice to make money now in this industry, but you don't have a future to actually spend your money. With hemp, you can make 25,000 products in 8 industries. You can literally change the face of the planet. And we grow hemp only to make CBD. It's pretty sad when you think that there is 150 plus cannabinoid and we're stuck on number 1 and number 2. It's crazy. Just because there is still that shadow of Schedule 1. In fact, I'm selling in California an illegal drug on a legal market. It's written down in capital letter on my packaging. Can somebody explain me how this happened? Because it's literally racketing. It's not legal. As long as the plant is Scheduled 1, there is no legality to it. We are living into a make-believe story, but nothing has yet happened.
George?
Yeah, so one of the things this international cannabis business has triggered is that Export Canada is looking at it very hard. They are talking to Health Canada. I think that we will see some dramatic changes, and they're looking for input. If you're in our industry, I urge you to reach out to them and have discussions with them. We need to make sure that the import-export regulations are good for everybody, and that could free up the market considerably for us in a lot of other areas too.
Yeah, I think there was a challenge because we did have a supply deficit in the legal market at one point. I think that's slowly being relieved. I'd heard that export permits were happening quite slowly for companies, given that there was a deficit here and there was a lot of supply being exported to countries like Germany. I agree that I think we are going to see some more traction there, that I think exports from Canada to European countries at the very least will start to move along quicker.
Yeah, the other thing is a lot of South American countries have reached out to us. We're working with some of them, hopefully to try to get them the permits to import into Canada. However, Health Canada says, well, if it's for medical purposes, great. But even if you bring some in, you test it, you get a handle on it, when this market changes, you'll be ready for it.
We've got about 3 minutes. I don't see any hands up there, but oh yeah, we got a couple of questions there. Jay?
Hi, my name's Paul. Quick question. So we still have a consumer who in some ways does understand quality, and large waste is not like they don't pick up on some of the smaller notes that make up larger quality. But what they do understand are names and hype, and you do see a lot of consumers that will chase a name or chase a brand or something like that. In a situation like that, how and what can growers do besides get better at marketing to really showcase their products?
So you're saying that in your market that the only things that are moving are things that have the built-in hype?
Not necessarily to an extent.
I think that what has to take place for most producers in general is first you actually satisfy the basic requirement of that the flour is decent. And so that begins trust. And then once you have trust, you can expose people to things. And so for me, as someone who's a large nursery provider for a long time and still is, it came down to a point where people didn't come in to ask me for a varietal anymore. They came in to say, what would be the direction I should go? And so you create that trust where people realize that you've been pretty accurate, that you've delivered success to them in their business. And when it comes to the cannabis, it's you've delivered success to them in their expectation of the flower. And I think that the sorting out process has to happen. We see it in California too, just like Canada, where the larger companies come in and they grind out a product. And the problem is it kind of falls short, and the end user feels that they've been slighted, so they become angry, and then they resent your brand. And I think that it's easier to try to cut down so much on how much diversity you're putting out, limit the initial amount that you release, so that you can actually focus on a good release, because that's your introduction. And then now people start to say, hey, this was a decent product. And then you can start to work on refining the process, because it's going to be a refining process, because cannabis has never been grown at this scale ever. So you're having to work with all these details of production, methodological details that we haven't done. And most of the people that have been exposed to cannabis, so many of them got it from friends and neighbors of themselves, and it was more of a craft product. And so there was a little more attention paid, and it usually cured a little better because it didn't move so fast. So they got a little bit more refined experience. So when they come into a more commercialized experience, they're already let down. And I think that's why the manufacturers, what you do is you focus on the products that you have the best control over, and you put those out. And those begin the introduction, and then people who are happy with those products will tell their friends, and that's how it works in real life, that I was satisfied with a thing, you might want to try it. And then when you release new products, you're able to release them based off of the fact that you have trust from your prior products. And instead of trying to give them the whole cornucopia of the cannabis world in one shot, you break it down into a simple, you release 6. And that's what you work with, because people really don't want to buy 6,500 different kinds of cannabis. From someone who's had stores for the last 12 years, running stores, people pretty operate on a consistent basis of, once I like something, I like it, and every now and then I'll deviate a little. And what we want to be able to do is catch those major groupings and satisfy them and allow them to be happy so they can recommend. And then you can start to introduce new products, you can start to take them down the taste road, you can start to bring them into different effects, you can start to open it up. But you have to define who your general group is, what they want, what the expectation is, and that seems so simple, but it's really not. But that's the way you go about it. You lock them in on something, and then you then introduce them as you move forward. And that way, trust, you have to build trust in your product, and somebody has to have a cannabis experience in every business in cannabis, because cannabis users, I've heard this so many times, that they just like to get high, they like drugs. And I'm just like, this is insane. You have to understand that there's a quality expectation that can't be underestimated. And someone must be present in your facility, in your business, in your supply chain, in your store, that says, that stuff is garbage, and I would not buy it twice. And let that person have a voice. They don't have to be the head grower. They don't have to be the CEO. You have to have someone that you allow to have an opinion that has an actual opinion based off of sales.
Perfect. Thanks. I think that's a great summary of what we need to have for a good international market is to build that trust in the product. And I just want to give thanks to George Routhier, Frenchy Cannoli, Jeanette VanderMarel, Kevin Jodrey, and Arjan Roskam. They will all be speaking later on in this event. So please join me in giving a warm thanks. Stick around. Frenchy is off to